Get ready to dive into medieval England, everybody. You guys sent in some truly fascinating sources. This time we're talking kings, courts, villages, towns, even the language people spoke. Buckle up.
It's going to be a wild ride through history. I always find it amazing how much we can learn about ourselves today by looking back at this period.
Totally. Okay, so one thing that really struck me was this idea of a king who's constantly on the move. It's not exactly the image of, like, majestic power we usually picture with a king, right?
Right. Forget those fancy portraits. We're talking about rulers like William the Conqueror, who were constantly on the road. Imagine the logistics. They'd pick up their whole court and travel to different locations throughout the year.
Wow. So what was the purpose of all this travel? Just a change of scenery?
Not even close. It was all about projecting their authority throughout the kingdom, making sure those taxes were collected, really just the nitty-gritty of keeping the kingdom running smoothly.
So these royal road trips weren't just for fun. They had real political implications.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what else? They played a key role in shaping the English legal system as we know it today.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, back then, things were much more, localized. Imagine a system where your local customs determine your legal rights. Think trial by ordeal.
Trial by ordeal. That sounds intense.
It was. It's where you'd have to, grab a hot iron or something to prove your innocence. Crazy stuff. But with the king constantly on the move, holding court in different places, we start to see things become more standardized across the kingdom.
So instead of local customs, they needed a unified legal system for the whole country.
Exactly. And that's where those judges on horseback come in, traveling the countryside, bringing the king's law with them. This era really lays the groundwork for what we know as common law in England. And it's important to remember, this put England on a different path from the legal systems developing on the continent at the time.
Judges on horseback, that's a visual I won't soon forget. It really highlights how different things were back then. But it's amazing to think about how those changes paved the way for the legal system we have today.
Absolutely. Okay, so are you ready to move from the courtroom to something a little different?
Always. What do you have for us?
Let's talk about life in medieval England. Because while those judges were traveling around, most people were living very different lives. Your sources painted a fascinating picture of village life, emphasizing both the hardships and, the really strong sense of community that you just don't see as much today.
There's something so intriguing about that, right? Like this idea that life was so challenging, but people really relied on each other to survive.
Exactly. Life revolved around agriculture. We're talking about the feudal system here, where you had peasants who were essentially tied to the land working for lords. In exchange, they'd receive protection and, the right to work the land.
It was a hard life, though, wasn't it? I mean, the sources don't sugarcoat the challenges they faced.
Yeah. No, not at all. We're talking backbreaking labor, the constant threat of bad harvests, disease. One source even said that a single failed harvest could wipe out an entire village.
Wow. It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
Right. And against this backdrop of precarity and hardship, we see the rise of towns, offering new opportunities and challenges to the existing social order.
It's like that old saying, go west, young man. Except it was, go to town, young man.
Ah, there you go. That's a great way to put it. People were drawn to towns as centers of trade and commerce, places where they hoped to find greater opportunity and, frankly, a bit more freedom.
Right, because towns offered a chance to break free from those rigid social structures of feudal life.
Exactly. Your sources even talk about how towns started to negotiate for more independence from feudal lords, how guilds were forming to regulate trade and protect the interests of craftsmen. It's a really dynamic period of economic and social transformation.
It's fascinating how these changes in the way people lived and worked also coincided with incredible intellectual and cultural developments.
Oh, absolutely. We see this amazing flourishing of learning and literacy during the 12th century, often called the 12th century Renaissance.
A renaissance in the 12th century. That's not something you hear every day.
It's true. The church played a huge role in promoting education, but we also see the emergence of some very important institutions, like, ever heard of Oxford and Cambridge?
Only every time I watch a British university drama. Those are some pretty old and prestigious places.
Exactly. And their roots go all the way back to this era.
Wow, I had no idea those universities were that old.
They've got some serious history. And of course, the language of scholarship and learning back then, Latin was everywhere during this period.
Latin, the language of Caesar. I always wished I'd paid more attention in Latin class.
Well, I'll let you in on a little secret. While Latin was super important, your sources also point to this era as a time of massive change for the English language itself.
Really? So, like, new words were popping up, grammar was shifting.
Precisely. It's a powerful reminder that languages aren't static. They're constantly evolving and adapting to the changing world around them.
That's fascinating. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into medieval England, what's the key takeaway here? What should we really remember about this period?
That's a great question. For me, it always goes back to the dynamism of this era. It wasn't just lights and castles, though. There were certainly plenty of those. It was an age of incredible transformation that laid the groundwork for so much of what we consider normal today. From our legal systems to our language, the echoes of medieval England are truly all around us.
That's a powerful thought, and it leaves us with plenty to ponder, like, what would England look like today if things had unfolded differently? If those towns hadn't risen to prominence, or if the legal system hadn't centralized? It makes you wonder,